One more
Hi.
time.
Here we go.
This is
Start
live.
and start again. This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration. This is Remote Daily, an oasis of innovation for your mind, your soul, your heart. Connect at and start again at Remote Daily. This is Remote. This is Remote Daily.
Remote Daily Summer Version by Leonor and Dario. Thank you so very much. Adapting and adapting again, just like you put it in the chat. This is all live. This is Remote Daily, and this is our amazing guest of today, crisis and change leadership author, speaker, and educator, Eric McNulty. Eric, so glad to have you. Welcome to the virtual stage.
Felix, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. There's a great musical introduction.
Only for you. And I would actually like to cheer with you, Eric. It's hot outside. We just worked out together. So everybody, whatever you have next to your screens, let's go of mute and wish Eric and all of us a happy week, a happy Wednesday. Cheers, everyone. Welcome to Remote Daily.
Cheers.
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 That feels good. Some last sip of iced coffee here. Eric, you got hydrated as well. So let's dig right in. In your book, you say that, there is like a great leader usually in some point in his life goes through a leadership moment that tests their character and defines their legacy. So that's quite a requirement. So I'm going to put you on the spot here and just ask you, what is the scariest thing you have ever done in your career?
First, I want to say I think it's a really unfair question after Jay just got us all mellowed out, and now you're going to the scary place. But it's a really, I think, an interesting one. I think one we should all consider. For me, so I've been laid off 3 times over my career. And I think the second one was the scariest because I decided I was working for a small creative agency that was going through some difficult financial times. So I was one of those who was let go. And I decided I would work for myself. I decided I'm not going to go chase another job. I'm going to work for myself, which I was able to do. I did it for a few years and then went back and joined Harvard, which is another long story. But the great thing about confronting that moment and taking that leap was I now know the worst anybody can do is fire me because I can make a living. I can figure it out and I'll make a living. So, and to me, it's a huge way to better appreciate your own skills and what you can bring is if you just know you can be self-reliant like that.
Wow, what a powerful message. And thank you for sharing so much courage with us. We have many in this community, myself included, and members of our team have been going through exactly that over the past 12 months, have been laid off, have had to make tough decisions, and are still in transition. We're still trying to figure this whole thing out. So thank you for sharing that. And to go one step further in your journey, you just mentioned Harvard, the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative, NPLI, that you co-started in the early aughts as a reaction to 9/11, if I'm not mistaken, whatever, in introduction to your book. And since then, you, together with this initiative, who went through its own ups and downs, as every little startup does in the beginning, you have managed to train and educate thousands of people across large and small organizations, governments, and institutions on how to survive crises as a leader. So please take us into a NPLI for a second and just tell us, what are you actually teaching? Like, what is a framework that you bring to so many people where you say, this is how you become a leader that is fit for whatever happens?
So I think what we just went through with Jade was the perfect introduction to this conversation because the thing people need to do when they face a crisis is breathe. and take that deep breath. So we use a framework we call meta leadership, META, which is it's meant to prompt you to take a broad view, like meta research or meta analysis. And that we know that when you're confronted with a threat, your brain narrows your focus. This is hardwired in us as human beings. You want to deal with the immediate threat and get rid of it. This is your triple F response: freeze, flight, fight. But your perception really physically narrows. And that's if you're confronted with someone who's going to do you physical harm, that's actually a great thing because you will react quickly and you'll get out of the way and may save your life. Most of our crises are not truly life threatening in that immediate moment. And so the ability to step back and see the bigger picture is essential if you're going to lead. And so that's where taking that deep breath, which is almost like it's like rebooting your brain, right? It's like rebooting a computer. When you take that breath, it actually alters the chemicals going on in your brain and it turns off that panic reaction and then allows the more reasoned response to kick in to say, okay, what's going on here? What needs to happen? Who needs to be here? And then you can begin to get productive. So that's the first thing we teach people is to get a bit smarter than your brain and understand how we're hardwired. And then secondly is to be able to look at a situation and try and figure out what's happening. So think about your cognitive biases, think about not only what you know, but what you don't know and what you may not know you don't know to begin to fill in the picture. And then the third dimension is connectivity. Nobody leads through a crisis alone. Leading is about a relationship between you and those who are following. So again, how about robust to those connections? Are the right people involved? Are you connecting with all the various stakeholders? Do you know what their interests are? And so when you think about that situation, how are you showing up as a person? Are you in control, regulating your emotions? And then have you activated your network appropriately? If you just do those three things, you're halfway to being able to get to a reasonably productive outcome from a crisis because you'll be more in control and able to sense what you ought to do and not be at the mercy of what's happening around you.
Fascinated. I honestly didn't know that this, yeah, take a breath, just stop from it. That is actually scientifically proven to be the best thing to do when whatever happens, just as a first stop, take a breath and then continue. And what you just said as the third thing, we have as a community explored so many times. I remember Derek, one of our community members, who when it comes to leadership, he says, for me, the pandemic taught me how to ask for help and not be afraid or not feel weird about it, especially as a man. This is sometimes hard to do, but this is something that you have also proven and laid out in your book, which is the most effective way to lead out of a crisis. So thank you for sharing that with us. And now to go to the today. And by the way, we have something new in Remote Daily today. Also to be more inclusive, to lead by example, we now have closed captions. So in your menu bar down there on Zoom, you should see a button that says closed caption. When you click that, you can actually see subtitles of everything that's being talked about here. We also create transcripts now from our shows. So we're just trying to lead by example and also share more with others and do more for others who join us on demand from a car while having lunch. This is for all of you. And to take us into this day today, Eric, you live off and you breathe executive education. And you told me when we met for the first time, you have barely taken a day off since COVID started because there was so much demand. So many people needed to figure out with you, together with you, what am I going to do now? So you have talked to hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, some of them students, some of them executives over the last couple of months. When you look at their sort of, if you take stock right now and you say, and I ask you, what is the situation that our leaders are in right now? How are they doing? What would you say, just based off of your own experience with talking to so many of them?
Well, I think that, and there's a great variety of people in that mix. And so the students, my former students, they are on the front lines in healthcare organizations, public health organizations in places like New York City, out in Washington State, at the federal level, as well as in private organizations and NGOs. I talked to folks at many of the major NGOs, and I think that they, like most of us, are exhausted. But what I have seen is there was a shift, and I guess we were in a better place now than we were a few months ago. And I don't mean that in a partisan way, but there's leadership, what I call leadership with a capital L, which is about power and position and sort of look at me. We had a lot of that going on, and but then there were always the core of sort of career folks who were just, let's get the job done. Let's figure out what needs to happen, make it happen. That's what I call leading with a lowercase L. You're not worried about who gets credit for it. You're not worried about, what your title is. You say, like, hey, this stuff needs to get done. Let's do it. Let's figure it out. We've had a lot of that, and I think there's a greater appreciation for it now at the senior most levels of our government. In fact, it was an interesting article in the New York Times yesterday about the White House staff and how they all have much lower profiles than their predecessors were. There's little tolerance for developing a media personality if you're the assistant deputy, whatever. Um, but it was like, let's head down. We know how to make this work. Let's get people vaccinated. Let's get schools open. Let's get cities back open. Let's just make things better for people. And I think that is what we're seeing. But I've done a lot of coaching over the last year with folks who've just been physically exhausted. And part of that role I can play is I know enough of their world to know what they're going through, but I'm not their boss. I'm not their peer. I'm not so in tight that I can't offer some objectivity. And so I've had a lot of sort of just off the cuff conversations and off the record conversations about, okay, here's how you deal with your boss, or here's how to take a break. Fortunately, it means I haven't taken a lot of breaks, but when I look at what they've done by comparison, I've had it very easy.
Leading with a lower L. What a beautiful metaphor to describe what the future holds. You have also defined radical shifts in leadership that are happening this year and will influence teams and organizations going forward. I think you have over a half a dozen that you have identified, but maybe you just want to share 2 or 3 with us today that we should look out for over the next few months.
Sure. I think, yes, I've identified 9 of them, but 3 of the most important. The first is that shift from sort of capital L leadership to lowercase L leading. And I think we've seen that in social justice movements. We've seen it in a lot of social action where people, again, not worried about being quote unquote in charge as much as let's do what needs to get done. And I think we're seeing more of that and a more distributed leadership or democratization of leadership, where people are leading from where they are and contributing what they can. And that I may lead right now and you may lead next. And we should be able to swap those roles without having any diminution in status. So it's not about the big capital L in your shirt or anything.
So leading almost as like a collaborative effort. So you're it, and then I'm it, and then you are
Right.
it.
And so we're on your show, so you're leading because you know the most here. And then when we get to, if we're going to a different setting and I'm more expert, then I may take over leading for a while, but we can hand that baton off without feeling like we're having to take a lower role. It's more, it's who's doing what. The second one I think is we need to move. We're moving from lines to circles, and that is thinking about, we had very linear thinking for a long time, very sort of industrial age, one step after the other, and we're now moving into an era where we're much more appreciative of the cycles of life, the cycles of seasons. We talk about the regenerative movement, where instead of a product going from manufacture to trash pile, but it goes through a full life cycle and then comes back and is recreated as something else. And even in ourselves in our careers, thinking about, you don't just go along this one trajectory and then peak and then you're done. But actually, there are times when you're growing and you're stepping up, and there may be times of retrenchment and coming back and rejuvenation, and you can come back again. So I think we're seeing much more appreciation of the circular. And when you go back to indigenous wisdom and other sort of non-Western views of the world, that circle is sacred, and the understanding of the circle, the cycles of life, and the circle. And then the third one, and
I wonder, Eric, sorry to
yes,
interject here. I wonder how accepted that is in the corporate world, though, this sort of circle. And the
it's
fact that, everybody has their ups and downs, and we all add more slashes to our job titles because we're all in multiple roles these days. There's still a lot of organizations and leaders who do not accept this. They're just looking on the CV, and if there's like a clear line, then that's good. If there's not a line, it's not good.
no, you're right. And this is not necessarily an easy transition or one that everybody accepts. But I think even as we are all seeing that, again, we have multiple roles. We have our portfolio live, so we're participating in the gig economy. We're putting together portfolios of things that work for us. And I think that the need to continually learn, which is really one of the drivers of this, means we are going to have times of output and times of input. So you're going to step up and be producing and doing something wonderful, and then you get to the point where you say, you know what, I need to, quality output requires quality input. and that may just be taking a break for a little bit. It may be going back to school, but it's not going to be as much of a linear progression across our careers. And that's it's never going to be a total transition, I don't think, and it will not come overnight. But I am seeing more and more of it. And the more if you just write this notion down and begin to look for it, you'll see more and more of it happening around us.
I would love to hear from some of the community members here on this, because I think every one of you has their own thoughts around the circular way of life, around the input versus the output. So please share your questions and comments in the chat or raise your hand. I would love to hear from each of you if you have a question for Eric. And Eric, you just talked about hierarchies in a way that I found super fascinating, because you're basically saying this old sort of power structure is, it's over, the capital L. But what do you suggest for all the organizations out there who still very much live the sort of like industrial age pyramid way of government in an organization? I mean, there have been many ways of self-organizing that have been tried out in organizations. Most of them fail. Where do you look at? Do you maybe have an example even for a company or an organization, institution, where you say, they are doing it right, this is how the future of hierarchy should look like?
Well, I think that it's a great point. And I think that the fact that there are so many experiments going on right now, and holacracy, sociocracy, there's a million ocracies, are evidence the old model was failing, and we're sort of trying to figure out and doing some iteration to see what might work. And I guess the two places I always go for inspiration, one are to go to cities, which I think are humans at their most dynamic, and then go to nature, which is where I find eternal truth and the divine. And hierarchies are going to happen. Whenever two or more of us are gathered, there is going to be a hierarchy of some sort, but we get to choose what establishes that hierarchy and what values it lives through. So, primate hierarchies, if we're primates, tend to be patriarchal and based on physical strength. That alpha is the alpha male and is usually the strongest, the sort of protector. Elephants, and I'm very active in elephant conservation, elephants also have hierarchies, but they're matriarchies. And getting to the top of that hierarchy is a matter of age, and it's age with an appreciation of wisdom, because that matriarch knows the best route to the watering holes, knows how to read the change of seasons and when to move from one place to another. And so as we have hierarchies, so as I look at all these models, and I am parts of participating communities that use different versions of them, none of them are perfect. I think you have to find the one that serves the community or the organization in which you're working. I think that the new book by Gary Hamel, Humanocracy, has some great examples of companies that are looking at much more distributed models. Hire, the appliance manufacturer, is one of them. W.L. Gore has long had one where it's very dispersed and not, no titles. It's very much about what's the job, let's get it done. And I think we are, again, going to see more of that, but it's going to be a slow transition. But it is, and what we don't want to do is make an overcomplicated model. I've gone into somewhere sociocracy, and again, the hierarchy quickly appears of those who are really familiar with the tools and the techniques and the concepts, and those who feel kind of left out. You wind up standing in the corner, not quite fitting in. So I think we ought to. The only reason to have organizations is that we can achieve more together than we can separately. So let's figure out what form of organization, what norms, and what values serve us to get done that which we come together to do, and let it flow
Thank
from
you.
there.
Yeah, and thank you so much for making the comparisons to nature here. Vaughn just recommended in the chat to check out a great new documentary on the culture of whales. National Geographic was also looking into their matriarchal system of hunting and passing down culture. So look for the elephants and look for the whales. I think this is not a joke. This is actually the most important thing to do when you're a leader. And what you have seen in so many examples now, Eric, is this sort of lack of trust, right? I think a lot of people realized over the last couple of months that their leaders are, excuse my French, are just shitty, and they do not live up to the occasion, and they have not been able to communicate in a way that everybody feels like they belong or that they are ready for the situation. And there's even a deficit in trust now in the government or in the healthcare system, when it comes to vaccinations, and in media and in so many things that we all took for granted for such a long time. So what is your, I mean, this is a biblical question almost, but how can a good leader rebuild trust in this time of losing trust in so many things?
So a couple of thoughts there. It is a big question. And I think trust is so central to all of this, because if we look at what we're, during the past 15 months of this pandemic, we've had to do a lot of adapting, and you adapt best when you're in a trust-based environment where you know what's expected of you and what you'd expect of others. So trust is central there. We talk about resilience, and resilience often comes from social connection, not necessarily just you alone, but you in connection with others, and you need those trust-based relationships. So two things I would say is first, um, which is a bit tangential, but I think it's still important, is let's stop calling people leaders who are not leading in ways that serve us. We can call them executives, we can call them whatever their title happens to be, but let's not call them leaders because they aren't leading. And it's a really difficult linguistic thing, because for so long we have called people at the top of organizations leaders, whether or not they're actually leading. So let's reserve that title as one that when people are leading in ways that serve us, those are our leaders. And then secondly, we have to begin to think about, and if you are trying to lead, how do you be trustworthy? How do you bake trust in from the beginning? One of my friends and people whose work I follow is a guy named Jerry Mikulski. Be a great guest for your show, actually. Does this work called Designing from Trust. It is, how do you start by designing, assuming trust is present? So if you work in an organization with an expense policy that runs several pages, or it's in a 4-inch binder, that screams, we don't trust you. If you work at Netflix, their expense policy is one line: act in the best interest of Netflix. That's it. And yes, if you go spend $400 on a bottle of wine, you may have to justify why you did that. So there is accountability, but they started out with the signal of, we trust you. We think you're smart. That's why we hired you. You've got a job. And so act in the best interest. And that's it. And you think of so many signals in our organizations and in our social lives say, we don't trust you. So as a leader, I think you need to begin to be aware of those and say, where can I send the signal that I do trust you and that you can trust me? And the more intentional you are about that, the more of a trust-based environment you'll build. And there's lots of research that shows that you will get better performance, deeper engagement, you'll solve more problems, you'll be more customer focused. All that good stuff happens when you operate from a basis of trust. So start by looking at it, being intentional about it, and trying to be aware of when you see those different signals.
But well, how do I tell someone that they're a shitty leader? Like if there's someone who is at the top of a team organization, and you just said it, they're being called a leader just because they're there or they have been there forever. How do I make sure that they understand what you just said, that they're not actually leading?
I think again, it depends a bit on your relationship with them. I don't expect you to walk into
Might get fired.
You might get fired, and hey, again, I love my position in life. The worst they can do is
So
fire
what?
me. Yeah, but you may say again, if you've got a direct relationship with this person, and not, I'm saying, like, if you work at General Motors, calling up Mary Barr and say you're a jerk, but I don't think she is, by the way. But if you have a relationship with that person, you may say, that last meeting, I don't think what you said resonated with people. I was watching their body language, and I don't think I don't think you accomplished what you intended. And I think if you, again, assuming that the person was trying to do something good and trying to lead, but wasn't getting there, help them be a bit more aware that you were seeing signals they weren't getting there. And one hopes if you've got a relationship, they'll say, oh, how might I do it better? Or what do you think wasn't working for them? And begin to have the conversation. I think a lot of poor behavior from among those in leadership positions is insecurity. It's lack of understanding of lack of self-awareness and how they're coming across. And we've rewarded people for hyper-competitive behavior for a long time instead of taking care of themselves and climbing up that ladder, and not being necessarily aware of those around them. It's interesting. Over the last couple of decades, we've seen in MBA programs, because they want to attract students, one of the things they have done is do away with a lot of requirements and put in more electives. That's very attractive to people. They want to make their choices, and they tend to choose a lot of courses in strategy and finance, because that's how you make a lot of money when you come out of business school. When they come back to executive education a decade or two later, They want to take the courses in organizational behavior and communication and all that human factor stuff. And they realize once they've been in the world a bit, that if they're going to actually succeed, those are the skills they need. And it just takes a bit of realization. So, and I'm a huge fan of coaching. If you can either have a coach, get a coach, recommend coaches to people, so you have that sounding board and somebody can say, you know what, Felix, I hear what you're saying, but you're full of crap. Let's get real here. And somebody who's just on your side, they're not going to tell anybody else, and you can have that really honest conversation. That to me is a huge help.
So to recap, how to tell a leader that they're not working well is to say, I looked around the room and I saw something that you might not have seen, so let me help you
Right.
see that instead of criticizing the person. And a question towards the future to wrap up here, Eric, and also I'd love to hear if anybody from the community wants to chime in. You have studied crises, like in your book, it's amazing. You study the Deepwater Horizon, you study the Boston Marathon. Of course, 9/11 was even the reason why you started your initiative. And COVID, again, is pushing us to the limits in many, many ways. Now, with your studying of patterns of crises for decades, what do you know today that we don't even know about yet, about the consequences of what we're currently going through? Please help us with a look into the future here.
Okay, we're going to go back down the scary route, the scary path. I think we're in a period of sustained turbulence much closer to the first half of the 20th century than the second half. Remember, the first half of the 20th century, we had the Spanish flu, we had two world wars, we had the Depression, lots of turbulence, and I think we are going to go through a similar kind of pattern again because we have climate change, which is we're already seeing the disruptions there. We have growing urbanization in places that don't have great public health or healthcare infrastructure. If you look at where the 10 biggest cities in 2050, only one of those who was on the list in 1950 is still going to be there. It's Tokyo. We have a lot of moving to the global south of populations getting urban, places like Lagos, Nigeria, Dhaka and Bangladesh, places again that don't have a lot of great governance and infrastructure in place. A big conglomeration of people. You have the youth of the world are concentrated in that global south where they have fewer resources, less access to education. When you get bored young people with a lot of energy and nowhere to put it, bad things can happen. So again, another source of potential disruption. And then we're just getting ever more tightly connected between trade, technology, and travel. The ripple effects are going much faster in the world. And so you're seeing, the Arab Spring was one fruit seller in Tunisia who got angry and lit himself on fire. We had the protests this past summer over the murder of George Floyd. That went like that because everyone now carries a production, a mobile production studio in their pocket. So we have incidents that can really accelerate turbulence very easily because we're so tightly connected. So all those factors together, I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, but I can tell you we need to be prepared to adapt, to be thinking about resilience, thinking about trust, because I think we really are in a time when people are going to have to know how to navigate and lead through more and more disruption and turbulence.
Wow. So looking at the turbulence, and so let's go to 2026, 5 years from now. What do you think will we have learned from that? What do you think will we have learned from what you just described?
What I hope we learn is that these complex challenges are not solved through the linear thinking of the past, and that our bureaucracies actually are so ill-equipped for dealing with complex problems. We actually have to move to more dynamic, more fluid structures. We actually have to trust people to do more themselves. I was actually moderating a panel this morning at the World Humanitarian Forum from London, and we talked about how we have to get over this idea that the rich donor countries are going to show up with a bunch of planes full of stuff anytime something happens somewhere else in the world. We actually have to think about how do we make those communities healthier and better equipped to get to do things themselves and listen deeply. So when we do come in, we're bringing in and we're assisting and supporting them, not bossing them around and trying to impose an outside model on them. The whole we have great richness and resources around the world, ourselves as humans, our our other than human counterparts. We need to appreciate that abundance and tap into it and not trying to overrule it by very limited sort of top-down patriarchal thinking is the best way to put it, I think. But sort of let's bring everybody into the mix and harvest all that abundance, and we will be able to solve a lot of problems.
Says our guest today on Remote Daily, Eric McNulty, an amazing crisis educator, speaker, and author and coach. And here is the book. Please get it. It's very hard to overlook. Just look for the matchstick on the cover, Crisis Change and How to Lead When It Matters Most. You are it. And I want to thank Eric, and we do that on Remote Daily here in the Zoom room in our only way. We just share some virtual glitter here with Eric McNulty. Thank you so very much for joining us today.